The year was 1889. The air over the Mogollon Rim tasted of iron and wet stone. It was a late spring, stubborn and cold, holding on to winter's dampness. Mist clung to the bunch grass, making the high meadows look like a shallow gray sea. On the ridgeline, etched black against the bruised purple of the coming dawn, a line of wild horses moved. They were ghosts in the half-light. A wind, too cold for May, pushed down from the high peaks. It carried the sharp scent of ponderosa pine and the heavy, metallic promise of the first big storm of the season. He watched the horses, his body motionless. Chayton. He was a man of 32 years, though most days he felt older than the canyons that carved the land. He moved without sound, his moccasins breathing against the granite. He was Apache, a warrior and a scout. But he walked alone, caught between the sacred boundary of his people's Cedar Canyon and the raw, loud noise of the town called Dry Water down below. He guarded the canyon, its hidden springs and ancestral markers. He tolerated the town, visiting only when necessity demanded, his face a mask of stone, his eyes missing nothing. Miles below, rattling in a deep rut, the stagecoach swayed violently. June Whitaker held the edge of the bench, her knuckles white. She was 25 years old, and she had come a very long way from the east. Her bones ached with a weariness that went deeper than the journey. In the pocket of her worn skirt, her fingers found the 4 folded edges of the letter. It was her future, or so she prayed. A job offer, signed in a neat hand by the proprietor of the Silver Comet Diner in Dry Water. She had skills. She had learned them the hard way in the railroad camps that dotted the new lines heading west. She had learned the tough art of cooking for hungry, impatient crews, making something from nothing. And she had learned the finer skill of caring for their animals, learning the craft of a farrier, tending to split hooves and loose shoes. She was a passable cook, her biscuits heavy but filling, but she was a good farrier. Her hands, though chapped, knew the feel of a healthy hoof. The air inside the coach was stale with unwashed bodies and old tobacco. When the wind gusted, tearing at the canvas roof, it brought the same smell Chayton breathed on the mountain, pine, and the unmistakable scent of coming rain. The storm was close. The driver had been shouting about it for the last hour, whipping the team to beat the deluge. But there was another storm discussed in whispers at the way stations. A different kind of thunder. A railroad. Silas Dorn, a name spoken with either reverence or fear, planned to bring the Iron Horse straight through this territory. They said he meant to cut the mountains. They said he would blast the high cliffs and build a bridge right across the sacred places, spanning the canyon Chayton called home. Chayton had heard the talk. It coiled in his gut like a cold snake. He had seen the surveyor's stakes, small wounds of fresh pine hammered into the earth. Dry Water was a town built on transitions. Cattle drives pushed north toward the grasslands. Miners scratched at the surrounding hills, looking for color. The railroad promised a boom, or perhaps just a different kind of bust. In the center of that town sat Marshall Pike. He was a man whose loyalties shifted with the weight of gold in his palm. And Silas Dorn had more gold than anyone. The Apache, the ND, were squeezed. They were pushed onto land that could not feed their families. Their traditions dismissed as shadows by the men arriving with steam engines and contracts. Chayton touched the small, worn leather pouch at his belt. It held blue cornmeal, ground by his mother before she passed. A blessing for safety, a tie to the earth. It felt heavy today. It reminded him of his vow. A year ago, an encounter with different surveyors had gone wrong. He had been too slow, perhaps too trusting of their smooth words. A fight had broken out. His younger brother had taken a bullet in the leg, a wound that healed badly, leaving him with a permanent, dragging limp that mocked Chayton every time he saw it. He had sworn then, quietly, fiercely, no outsider would desecrate Cedar Canyon again. He would not fail his duty a second time. June's letter was also about an escape. She was not just running toward a job. She was running away. Her last post, a dusty, fly-blown camp on the Union Pacific Line, had ended badly. It had ended because of a man named Rusk. He was former cavalry, with flat, empty eyes and a presence that crowded the air out of a room. He was a foreman for Dorn Consolidated, the same company building the rumored line south. Rusk had watched her. His attentions, subtle at first, had grown heavy, suffocating. He had a way of standing too close, of letting his hand brush hers. That made her skin crawl. She left in the middle of the night, using nearly all her savings for the long stagecoach ticket south. She prayed Drywater was far enough. She prayed the Silver Comet was real and respectable. In her heavy satchel, wrapped in oilcloth, were her tools, the rasp, the hoof knife, the nippers, the small hammer. They were solid, honest steel. They did not lie. They were tools for mending, for making things right. She wanted, more than anything, to mend her own life. Chayton watched the clouds boil up over the canyon rim. The gray turned to a dark, angry green. He clutched the pouch, the fine meal a soft, solid weight in his palm. He was the guardian. June felt the coach lurch into another hole, throwing her against the door. The first fat drops of rain struck the canvas roof like thrown gravel. She checked her satchel, feeling the hard, familiar outline of her farrier's hammer. She was the builder. Two worlds, two kinds of healing, poised on the edge of the storm. The stagecoach did not so much arrive in Drywater as surrender to it. The wheels sank into a thick, greedy mud that was equal parts dirt and horse manure. The rain, which had been a threat on the mountain, was a miserable reality here. A steady, cold drizzle that turned the main street into a river of brown slop. June Whitaker pulled her satchel clear before the driver could toss it into the mire. She stepped down, her boots immediately sinking, and pulled her thin cloak tighter. The town was loud. Hammers rang against anvils. Men shouted from the porches of two competing saloons, and the air smelled of wet pine, whiskey, and frying fat. She clutched the letter, its edges soft from her anxious fingers, and began to walk. She found the address easily enough, halfway down the street, squeezed between a land office and a gunsmith. It was a corpse. The windows were boarded over, the wood already pale with the sun and rain. The door was barred, where the sign for the Silver Comet Diner should have been. There was only a lighter patch of wood, a ghost of a name, and 4 empty nail holes. June stood in the rain, the hope that had carried her for 600 miles draining out of her, leaving her cold and empty. The letter was a lie. A man spat a stream of brown tobacco juice that landed near her feet. "Looking for something, Missy." He wore a marshal's star, but it was pinned to a vest stained with old food. His belly strained against his shirt. He was Marshal Pike, and his eyes were dirty. "I had a letter," she said, her voice unsteady. "A job at the Silver Comet." He laughed, a short, wet sound. "Comet's been dark for 6 months. Owner went bust." He looked her over, a slow, appraising gaze that took in her wet hair, her worn dress, and the satchel in her hand. "You a cook, you said." "Yes," she managed, "and I work with horses." "Forget the horses." He leaned closer, and she could smell the sour tobacco on his breath. "Silas Dorn's railroad crew is hiring. They always need help. A woman who knows her way around a kitchen? Well, you'd be real popular." The way he said it made her stomach clench. It was not a job offer. It was an assessment of goods. This was the trap she had been warned about. This was the kind of employment that happened in back rooms and tents, not over a stove. "Thank you, Marshal," she said, stepping back. "I will consider it." She turned and walked away, her shoulders tight. She found the meager shelter of an awning and pulled the letter out again, her hands shaking with anger. It was a fake. She had been lured here. She looked at the signature, the looping, elegant script of the supposed owner, and her blood ran colder than the rain. She knew that handwriting. It was not a diner owner. It was the same precise, cold hand that had signed the pay vouchers at the last railroad camp. It was the signature of Dorn Consolidated's chief accountant. She had been brought here, specifically, by the very company she was trying to escape. But why? Miles away, higher up, Chayton had been tracking the surveyors. Their trail was sloppy, arrogant. But a new sound reached him, overriding the rising wind, shouts, and the panicked thunder of hooves. He moved to the edge of the rim, staying behind a screen of juniper. Below him, in a wide basin, 3 men in canvas coats were driving a string of horses. They were not cattlemen. They were running the animals too hard, wasting their strength, using their whips with a vicious, lazy pleasure. They were Dorn's hired guns. A young foal, legs still spindly and unsure, struggled to keep up with its mother. It veered, confused by the shouts, and one of the riders cut it off, cracking his whip. The foal screamed, a thin, terrified sound, and tried to double back over a patch of loose rock. Its leg caught. It went down. There was a sharp, wet sound, like a thick branch snapping, that carried even over the wind. The foal tried to rise, but the back leg folded, hanging uselessly, the white shard of bone visible even from this distance. The riders laughed. One of them pointed. Then they spurred their horses on, leaving the foal to struggle in the mud, its mother circling frantically until another rider chased her off. Chayton's hand went to the pouch of blue cornmeal. A cold, pure anger settled in his chest. This was their progress. This was the civilization they promised. He watched until the men disappeared, their laughter swallowed by the canyon. He waited, then made his way down the slick rocks. The foal was still alive, its eyes wide with terror, its breath coming in short, panicked pants. He saw the break. It was a killing wound. He drew his knife. His ancestors would forgive this. A mercy, but he would not forgive the men who caused it. He looked at their tracks, already washing away in the rain. They led down, always down, toward dry water. He followed. June felt lost. She was in a strange town, with no job, no money, and the target of a powerful, unseen company. She walked the boardwalk, her head down, trying to think, trying to keep the panic from swallowing her. A sudden shout cut through the street noise. "Pick him up! I said pick him up! You filthy whelp!" She looked up. A large man in a cavalry duster had kicked over a stack of newspapers. A young boy, maybe 10 years old, with dark eyes and skin, was scrambling to gather the muddy papers. He was crying. "You dirtied them!" the boy protested, his voice high with fear and indignation. The man grabbed the boy by the shirt and hauled him to his feet. "Teach you to talk back, cur—" June froze, her breath hitched. She knew that flat, bored expression. She knew the empty eyes. It was Rusk, the foreman, the man she had fled. He was here. He drew back his hand to strike the child, and June moved without thinking. "Leave him alone." Her voice was thinner than she wanted, but it cut through the rain. Rusk turned, his head tilted, and for a second, he looked confused. Then, a slow, sick smile of recognition spread across his face. "Well, now," Rusk drawled, his voice a low rumble. "Look what the storm blew in. I was wondering where you ran off to." He dropped the boy, who scrambled away. Rusk turned his full attention to her. His hand still held the coiled leather of a riding whip. "You never did learn your place, June," he said. He took a step toward her. "Maybe it's time I taught you proper." He uncoiled the whip, his intention clear, his smile widening as she flinched. He drew his arm back for a sharp, stinging cut. The whip never landed. A hand, dark and strong, shot out from the alleyway and closed around Rusk's wrist. The grip was absolute. Rusk grunted, surprised, and tried to pull free. The hand did not budge. Chayton had come from nowhere, silent as the rain itself. He had not looked at June. His eyes, black and cold as the mountain rock, were locked on Rusk. With a powerful twist, Chayton wrenched the whip from Rusk's grasp and threw it into the mud. He said nothing. Rusk, his face purple with rage, snarled and reached for the heavy revolver at his hip. "Rusk, that is quite enough." The voice was smooth, educated, and carried an authority that stopped even Rusk's anger. Silas Dorn stood on the boardwalk of the saloon, perfectly dry beneath the awning. He held a thin cigar, and he looked disappointed. Marshal Pike stood just behind him, looking nervous, his hand hovering near his own gun. "My foreman," Dorn said, addressing June with a polite, cold smile. "Forgets his manners in the presence of a lady." Rusk slowly took his hand away from his gun, his gaze still fixed on Chayton. Chayton used the moment. He did not turn. He simply stepped back, blending into the dark space between the buildings. One moment he was there, a solid, defiant presence, and the next he was gone. June was left standing, trembling, facing the two men who, she now realized, controlled her entire world. "Silas Dorn?" the man said, tipping a hat he did not need to. "Of the Dorn Consolidated Railroad." He gestured to the town. "We are bringing progress to this valley. Miss, a new age of civilization. We are building a bridge, a great testament to industry, right over that useless gorge they call Cedar Canyon." Rusk said nothing, but his eyes never left her. They were full of promises, and none of them were good. "Rusk," Dorn said, turning. "The saloon. We have matters to discuss." Rusk gave her one last look, a look of ownership, before he turned and followed his master. June, desperate to escape, to breathe, to think, backed into the same narrow, dark alley that her silent defender had vanished into. It ran behind the saloon. It was choked with rain barrels and empty crates. A window was propped open a few inches, letting out a sliver of yellow light and the murmur of voices. She pressed herself against the wet wood, trying to still her hammering heart. She heard Dorn's voice, no longer polite, but sharp and metallic. Utterly unacceptable. I want the explosives moved tonight. All of them. I want the pass cleared in 10 days. 10. Do you understand me? No delays. The press arrives on the 11th. There was a sullen murmur from Rusk. Then his voice, clearer. "And the girl, the one from the camp?" A sigh from Dorn. "You were careless to let her get here. She was supposed to be in Pike's employ by now. Find out what she knows. And Rusk, keep an eye on her. I will not have any complications." June pressed her hand to her mouth. 10 days. They were going to blast the canyon. And she was not just a runaway. She was a complication. Panic was a cold, sharp stone in her stomach. June did not wait to be found. She slid from the alley, her back pressed to the wet clapboards, her eyes scanning the street. The sun was gone, leaving only a smear of angry red between the dark, heavy clouds. Twilight was not a comfort. It was a shortening of time. Dry water was a box, and Rusk knew she was in it. She had left her satchel on the porch of the stage office, too heavy to carry while she looked for a job that did not exist. She moved quickly, her head down, a woman of no importance. Just another traveler caught in the rain. She grabbed the satchel, the leather strap slick in her hand. Her tools inside gave a heavy, reassuring clink. She could not take the main road. They would look for her there. She remembered the alley, the way it sloped down behind the buildings. She remembered the sound of rushing water. She slipped between the gunsmith and the land office, her boots sinking into the mud. The noise of the town faded, replaced by the rising roar of the storm and the sound of the creek. It was not a creek anymore. The steady rain had swollen it to a small river, brown and churning, tearing at the roots on its banks. It was her only path. She followed it, moving into the growing darkness. The rocks were treacherous, covered in a slick algae. She used her hands as much as her feet, her cloak snagging on thorns, her satchel bumping heavily against her hip. She thought, for a blissful half hour, that she had made it, that she was free. Then she heard the shout, "There, by the water!" It was not Rusk. It was one of the men who had been with him at the saloon. A pair of them. They were on the bank above her, dark shapes against the sky. June did not look back. She plunged into the shallow, fast-moving water, gasping as the icy current wrapped around her legs. She scrambled up the opposite bank, clawing at the mud, pulling herself up by roots. Another shout, a gunshot. The bullet snapped through the branches far above her head, a sound like a dry twig breaking. They were not trying to kill her. Not yet. They were trying to hurt her. She ran. She was no longer following the creek. She was climbing, moving uphill, into the high, broken country. The world dissolved into a nightmare of rain, wind, and burning lungs. The storm, which had been a threat, now declared war. The sky tore open. A sheet of white lightning turned the world into a stark, terrifying photograph for one frozen second. She saw the twisted pines, the gleaming faces of the rocks. The sheer drop just feet from her path. Then came the thunder. Not a rumble, but a physical blow that seemed to crack the very mountain beneath her. The rain was a solid thing, a falling river that blurred all vision. She could not see her pursuers, but she could not see the path either. She was climbing on instinct, her hands raw, her skirts impossibly heavy with water and mud. The ground gave way. She did not fall far, but she slid, tumbling down a steep, muddy incline, coming to a painful stop against a tangle of roots. She lay there, stunned. The air knocked from her. The world was spinning. She had no idea which way she had come. She could hear the men shouting, but their voices were thin, ripped away by the wind. They sounded confused, farther away. She was lost. She was in the high country, the land the mapmakers left blank, the place the men in town called Apache territory. June pulled herself to her feet. She was shaking so violently she could barely stand. She found a small recess in the rock, a shallow overhang that offered almost no protection, and huddled into it. She pressed her face against her knees, just trying to breathe, just trying to stop the terrible, agonizing shaking. He was simply there. She looked up, sensing a change in the air, and he stood before her. He was not a man. He was a piece of the storm, as solid and as cold as the granite. Chayton. He did not look like the man who had saved her in the alley. His face was a mask of cold fury, his black hair plastered to his skull by the rain. His knife was in his hand, its blade dark. "You," he said. His voice was low, but it cut through the wind. "You run from your masters, and you lead them here." "No," she gasped, scrambling backward. "Please, I did not lead them. I was running. They are lost." "As you are lost," he stated. He grabbed her arm. His grip was not a rescue. It was a capture. His fingers dug into her flesh like talons. "You are one of them. You are Dorn's." "I am not," she cried, trying to pull away. "He tried to trick me. Rusk is here. They are going to blast the canyon." His grip tightened, and he dragged her from the shelter of the rock, out into the driving rain. "You lie." In her struggle, the letter, the sodden, useless letter, fell from her pocket into the mud. He stopped. He bent and snatched it up. In a flash of lightning, he unfolded the paper. He did not need to read the words. His eyes went straight to the bottom, even wet. The embossed seal was unmistakable. The eagle and the hammer, Dorn consolidated. His face, which had been hard, became something empty and terrible. "You carry his mark." "It was a lie," she screamed over the wind. "A false job to trap me." He did not listen. He did not care. He began to pull her through the trees, dragging her when she stumbled. "You will come." "Where, please? They will find us." "They will not," he said, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her more than the rain, that he was right. He moved through the storm as if it were his home, pulling her along a path she could not even see. He forced her around a massive, balancing boulder, and suddenly They were out of the wind. He pushed her through a curtain of ancient, hanging roots into a deep, dry cave. A fire smoked in the center, struggling for life. Around it, huddled in thick blankets, were his people. June saw two old women, their faces like carved wood. She saw a young man with a badly healed leg that was stretched out awkwardly. And she saw three small children, their eyes wide and dark, watching her. The cave was cold. The fire was failing. One of the children coughed, a thin, dry sound that echoed in the silence. They were all staring at her, this drowned rat of a white woman, their faces full of suspicion and a quiet, desperate hunger. June stood, dripping, her body shaking with a cold that was bone deep. She had run from one trap only to fall into another. It was too much. The terror, the cold, the hopeless, crushing reality of her situation broke over her. She began to cry, silent, scalding tears that mixed with the rain on her face. Chayton saw her break. His expression did not soften. It hardened. He shoved her roughly toward the fire pit. "Stop crying and cook," he commanded. The words were so harsh, so unexpected. They were like a slap. She looked up at him. Her vision blurred. "What?" "You are a cook," he said, spitting the word with contempt. He held up the ruined letter. "It says so here." He pointed to the shivering children. "They are cold. They are hungry. The fire is dying. The wood is wet." He grabbed her arm again and pushed her to her knees by the smoking wood. "Make the fire. Cook, or you are useless, and we have no room for useless things here." It was a test. It was a command. June looked from his cold, angry face to the small, pinched face of the youngest child. A different emotion cut through her despair. It was anger. A hot, clean anger that burned away the fear. She wiped her muddy hands on her even muddier skirt and turned her back on him. She knelt by the fire. She pushed aside the smoking, soggy logs. She took the small, sharp knife one of the old women offered her. She found the driest branches in the pile and began to split them, getting to the dry heartwood within. She laid the kindling with the careful, practiced hands of someone who had coaxed fires to life in far worse conditions. She shielded the last dying embers with her own body, blowing gently, steadily, until a single, weak flame licked the new wood. Chayton watched her, his suspicion a heavy weight in the air. He knelt beside her as she worked, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his wet buckskins. He was watching her every move, waiting for her to fail. Then he stiffened. He leaned closer, his head tilting, his nostrils flaring. He was not looking at her. He was smelling her. "What is that smell?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "It is the rain," she whispered, not looking up from the fragile flame. "It is mud." "No." He grabbed the shoulder of her dress, his fingers bunching the wet fabric. He pulled her closer, ignoring her gasp, and put his face near her cloak. "It is the smell of the rock breakers, the thunder stick." He knew that sharp, oily, sulfurous scent. It was dynamite. June froze. She remembered the alley, the crates stacked by the back door of the saloon. "I was hiding," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "Behind the saloon, I leaned against some crates. They were covered in canvas, but they were leaking. Dorn. He told Rusk to move them. Tonight." His eyes held hers. He was weighing the truth of it. The smell was real. Her fear was real. The story fit. The fire caught. A small, bright column of flame rose, pushing back the cold, pushing back the shadows. And in the new light, June saw what was in the deepest part of the cave. It was the foal, the one she had seen from the stagecoach, the one whose leg had snapped. It was lying on a deep bed of dry pine needles, its body trembling in spasms of pain and fear. Its leg was a terrible ruin, the bone still stark and white where it had broken the skin. Chayton saw her look. "It is the work of your people," he said, his voice flat. "It will be dead by morning." June forgot Chayton. She forgot the children, the storm, her own danger. She moved toward the animal, her hands out. "No," she whispered. She knelt in the straw. The foal's eyes rolled, white with terror. "Easy," she murmured. Her voice changed, dropping into a low, soothing sound, the same sound she had used for 1,000 spooked horses. "Easy now. I know it hurts." She did not try to touch the leg. She laid her hand on its neck, a firm, warm pressure. "I am here. It is all right." The foal, which had been panting in quick, shallow gasps, let out a long, shuddering breath. It did not relax, but it stopped fighting. It leaned its head, just a fraction of an inch, into her steady hand. "The bone is through," Chayton said, standing over her. "It is finished." "No," June said, her voice fierce. She looked up at him, her eyes flashing in the firelight. "It is bad, but the break is clean. It needs to be set. It needs a splint." She looked around the cave, her mind working quickly. "Those branches you have for the fire, the straight ones, and cloth. We need strips of cloth." She looked at her own ruined skirt. "We can bind it. I have done this before. I can save this horse." Chayton stared at her. He watched her hands, chapped and muddy, as they stroked the foal's muzzle with a tenderness that was shocking. He looked at her eyes. They were not the eyes of a liar, or a spy. They were not the eyes of Dorn, or Rusk, or Pike. They were the eyes of a person who knew how to mend. He was torn. His duty was clear. She was an outsider. She carried the scent of the enemy. She carried their seal. But the animal, a creature of his land, a victim of their cruelty, was trusting her. One of the old women by the fire made a soft sound. Chayton looked at her. She met his gaze, and she nodded. Just once, a small, profound gesture. He made his decision. "Do it," he said. June looked up, startled by the sudden change in his voice. "The horse," he clarified, his face still a mask. "Fix what your people broke." He turned away from her and walked to the mouth of the cave, staring out at the storm. "You will work," he said, his back to her. "You will help the animal. You will cook for my people. In the morning, when the storm breaks, I will take you away from this place. You will not come back." It was not kindness. It was a bargain. One night. June looked down at the foal, which had rested its head on her knee. "One night." She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She would take it. The wind hammered the mouth of the cave, driving the rain in sideways. The air was frigid. June ignored the man who watched her. Chayton. He stood near the entrance, a silhouette against the gray. Violent light, his arms crossed, his anger a palpable cold in the shelter. His voice was still harsh, a low growl under the storm. "Stop crying and cook." June flinched but did not look at him. She had finished her work on the fire, which now burned with a steady, yellow heart. She had pushed the fear down, replacing it with the sharp focus of a task. She turned her attention to the foal. The animal was trembling, its terror a high, vibrating wire. She approached it slowly, speaking those low, meaningless words that animals understood better than language. Chayton watched. He expected weakness. He expected her to recoil from the wound, from the sight of the slick, sharp bone. But the woman he saw was not the one who had collapsed in tears. Her hands, though shaking violently from the cold, became instruments of purpose. She gently cupped the foal's head, lifting it from the pine needles. Her voice was a low murmur, a thrumming sound that seemed to cut through the animal's pain. She unfastened her own heavy, waterlogged cloak. It was the only barrier she had left against the storm. Without hesitation, she began tearing it into long, wide strips. The fabric was thick, resisting her, but she put her weight into it. Her teeth gritted, ripping the wool into serviceable bandages. She fashioned 2 rough splints from the branches he had provided, padding them with moss. She used the longest piece of her cloak to fashion a temporary sling, looping it under the foal's body to help support its weight. taking the strain off the shattered limb. Her movements were economical, deft. She did not waste an ounce of energy. She whispered to the foal, comforting it, reassuring it, her breath a plume of white in the cold air. Chaitin's gaze, which had been hard as obsidian, shifted. He saw the cold shaking her body, but he also saw the absolute gentleness in her hands. She held the broken creature as if it were the most precious thing in the world. He had seen his people's healers work with that same focused reverence. He had not expected to see it in an outsider. His eyes, fixed on her steady hands, softened. After she had finished setting the splint and had gotten the animal to drink a little water, she finally rose. Her legs were stiff. She was aware, suddenly, of the silent audience. The 3 children, the young man with the injured leg, and the 2 old women. One of the women, her face a beautiful map of deep lines, pointed to a small buckskin bag near the fire. He said, "Cook." The woman said, her English slow but clear, "We have corn, nothing else." June nodded. She felt the scrutiny. This was a different test. She took the bag. It was blue cornmeal, finer than any she had ever used. She looked at the meager supplies. A pot, a little water, some salt. It was less than nothing. She worked. She missed her own supplies, her spices, her lard. But she made do. She mixed the meal with water, adding a pinch of salt, and set the pot near the edge of the fire, letting the coarse soup heat slowly. It was a thin offering, but it would be warm. She served the children first, pouring the hot, blue liquid into small clay cups. They took them, their dark eyes wide, looking first to the old woman, who nodded permission. They drank, the heat bringing a faint touch of life back to their faces. June offered a cup to the young man with the bad leg. He took it with a gruff nod, his eyes flicking to Chaitin and then back to her. Finally, she brought the pot to the 2 matriarchs. The one who had spoken to her, the older one, took the cup. She held it in both hands, breathing in the steam. She looked at June, a long, deep look that seemed to read the marrow in her bones. Then the old woman spoke, her voice too low for Chaitin to hear over the wind. It was not English. It was a soft, flowing sound. It felt like a blessing. June did not understand the words, but she understood the meaning. She had been seen. For this night, in this cave, she was not the enemy. She was simply a person, doing what was needed. Chaitin did not like this. He did not like the easy way the children watched her, or the blessing in the old one's eyes. Acceptance was dangerous. He walked back toward the fire, his presence shutting down the fragile peace. He pointed to the foal. "It has pain. The leg will swell." "Yes," June said, bracing herself. "It needs willow bark, or something to dull the ache. The break was bad." "We have a plant," he said. "It grows on the ledge, by the spring. It calms the pain. The old ones cannot fetch it in the storm. The young man cannot walk." His eyes locked on hers. "You will go." June looked at the mouth of the cave. The world outside was a roaring, black chaos of wind and water. It was not a suggestion. It was a challenge, bordering on a death sentence. "It is dark," she said, her voice flat. "And the storm is strong. I will show you where it begins. The plant has a yellow flower. Even in the rain, it grows low to the rock." He was testing her grit, her willingness. He was reminding her of her place. "Give me a bag," she said. He led her to the cave mouth. The wind tore at her, soaking her clothes instantly, ripping the breath from her lungs. He pointed into the screaming darkness. "There, follow the wall, 100 paces, where the water runs down the rock." She stepped out. She was gone for almost an hour. Chaitin stood by the entrance, listening. He heard the rattle of loose rock once. He heard the wind trying to pull the mountain down. He felt a strange, unwelcome tension in his gut. It was one thing to let the storm take an enemy. It felt like another thing now. He found himself scanning the darkness, listening for a cry that was not the wind. She returned. She did not fall through the entrance. She walked, placing one foot precisely in front of the other. She was covered in mud from a fall. Her hair was a wild tangle, but her jaw was set, and in her hand she clutched a wet, dark bundle of herbs with small, defiant yellow flowers. She walked past him without a word, her face pale but resolute. She did not complain. She did not shiver, though her body was shaking so hard he could see it. She went to the fire, crushed the herbs as the old woman showed her, mixed them with a little water, and made a poultice, gently applying it to the foal's swollen leg. Chayton watched her. His test had failed, or perhaps it had succeeded in a way he did not intend. She had Gen. She had a spine made of iron. Toward the hour before dawn, the storm's fury broke. The wind died down to a low moan, and the rain softened to a steady, quiet drumming. The silence in the cave felt heavy. Chayton moved to the entrance. "Come." June hesitated, then followed him. He led her out of the shelter and up a short, slick path to a high overlook. The air was clean, washed, and painfully cold. Below them, the world opened up. Dawn was coming. The mist was thick in the canyon bottom, but the opposite rim was clear, painted in the first pale light. It was Cedar Canyon. It was beautiful. It was a green, winding slash in the red rock, a place that felt untouched by human hands. "This is what they want," Chayton said, his voice quiet. Then June saw them. Across the canyon, hammered into the far cliff face, were new, raw wooden stakes. They formed a perfect, brutal line, marking the path of the coming bridge. They were a scar on the sacred land. "They were not there 2 days ago," Chayton said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, which made the anger beneath it all the more terrible. "They plan to blast," June said, her voice just as quiet. "In 10 days. He turned to her. The suspicion was back, sharp and cutting. "You said this. The smell on your clothes proved it. But you did not say why. Why would Dorn's men speak of this in front of you?" This was the moment. He had shown her the stakes. She would show him the truth. "The letter I had," she said. "The job at the Silver Comet. It was a lie. It was a trap." "A trap for what? Why you?" "Because I ran from one of their camps. A man named Rusk. He is Dorn's foreman. He wanted things from me I would not give. I fled. I thought I was escaping him, but they knew I was coming. The signature on the letter was from Dorn's accountant. They brought me here on purpose." She paused, taking a breath. "I was not meant to hear them. I was hiding in the alley after Rusk found me. I overheard them through a window. Dorn and Rusk. Dorn said the press is arriving on the 11th day from now. He wants the pass cleared. He ordered Rusk to move the explosives tonight, and he told Rusk to keep an eye on me. He called me a complication." Chayton's hand, which had been resting on his knife, moved to the small leather pouch at his belt. His fingers closed around the blue cornmeal. He believed her. The story was too specific, too strange, to be a lie. The smell, the foal, the letter, the stakes, the timeline, it all fit together, a puzzle of greed and violence. She was not a spy. She was a piece of bait that had broken its string. He looked at her, really looked at her. In the cold morning light, she was tougher than she looked. She was also terrified. But she was standing here, telling him the truth, when she could have stayed silent. "You are in more danger than I knew," he said. "We are," she corrected him. "If they are moving the explosives, they mean to start soon." A strange intimacy formed in that moment. The bond of two people staring at the same enemy. The wind was gentle now. From the cave behind them, they could hear the soft breathing of the children, the crackle of the fire, the occasional stamp of the foal. It was, for a few hours, a home. The smell of the herbs she had picked mixed with the scent of the piñon smoke. The storm was gone. Chayton felt the pull. This woman, with her quiet strength and her healing hands, was an anomaly. He felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire, and it terrified him. He stepped back, breaking the fragile connection. He turned his face to stone. "You are an outsider," he said, his voice sharp again. June flinched, confused by the sudden cold. "My laws are clear," he said, speaking more to himself than to her. "Our ways are not your ways. We cannot harbor you." "I understand," she said, though the rejection stung. "But the information you carry," he continued, his mind working. "It changes things. 10 days, the press. This changes the plan." He had promised to lead her away, to send her back to her world, but he could not. If he sent her back to dry water, Rusk would find her. She would be silenced. If he sent her away on the road, she would be vulnerable. And more, she was a witness. She knew the timeline. She knew the names. "My promise to send you away, it is void," he said. "What? You are no longer just a stray. You are a weapon, and I must take you to our elder." He turned and started down the path toward the cave. "You will come with me now. We go to Elder Natsa. He will hear your words, and he will decide what we do with you." June watched him go, a man of brutal contradictions, a man who saved her one moment and held her captive the next. She looked one last time at the ugly stakes across the canyon. She pulled her ruined cloak tight. She had survived the night. She had survived the storm. But she had a feeling the real test was just beginning. She followed him down the rock. The journey to Elder Natsa's camp was slow. The storm had broken, but the world was a ruin of mud and running water. Chayton led the way, not with the impatient speed he had used when he captured her, but with a steady, ground-eating pace that considered the old, the young, and the wounded. June walked with the 2 old women. The one who had blessed her was named She Who Remembers. The other was Laughing Stone. The young man with the bad leg, whose name was Kale, rode a weary mule. The children were quiet, their dark eyes watching everything. Luyu, a young woman of perhaps 18 years, moved between the children and the pack animals. She was Chayton's cousin, and she looked at June with an open, burning hostility. The foal was carried on a travois, pulled by a strong, steady horse. June walked beside it as much as she could, steadying it on the slick downhill paths, murmuring to it when it panicked. They traveled for 2 hours, moving deeper into the maze of red rock. Through canyons so narrow June could touch both walls. The camp was not a camp. It was a village, hidden in a high, bowl-shaped valley, shielded from the world by sheer cliffs. Smoke rose from a dozen grass wickiups and more permanent, solid-looking huts. A man, older than the mountains, sat on a blanket outside the largest structure. He was weaving a basket, his hands gnarled but steady. This was Elder Natsa. Chayton stopped before him and spoke, his voice low and respectful. In the Apache tongue, he spoke for a long time. June stood apart, feeling the eyes of the whole village on her. She was the outsider, the enemy, brought into their most sacred place. When Chayton finished, Elder Natsa looked at June. His eyes were not cold, like Chayton's had been. They were ancient and clear, and they held no judgment. They simply saw. "He says you carry the scent of their poison," Natsa said, his English as clear as the old woman's. "He says you carry their mark, but he says you also have a healer's hands. He is confused. I am not." He gestured to the ground. "Sit. Tell me your story. Do not leave out the parts you think we do not understand. We understand everything." A small council gathered. Natsa, Chayton, a broad-shouldered man with burns on his arms, whom Chayton introduced as Tohon, the blacksmith, and Luyu, who stood behind Natsa, her arms crossed, her eyes spitting fire at June. The debate began before June even spoke. Luyu's voice was sharp. "She is a spy. Why else would she be here? She carries Dorn's mark. She smells of his powder. She is a lie. Chayton, and you have brought her to our heart." "She did not come as a spy," Chayton countered, his voice flat. "She came as a rabbit, running from the fox. I saw the man, Rusk. I saw his face. His anger was real." "A good act," Luyu spat. Tohan, the blacksmith, interrupted. He spoke to June directly, his voice a low rumble. "You say they will blast? What do you know of such things? Talk is wind." June took a breath. She told her story again. The fake letter, the accountant's signature, the boarded-up diner, Marshall Pike's leering offer, Rusk's cruelty to the boy, Chayton's intervention, the words she overheard, Dorn's plan, 10 days, the press. "It is a good story," Luyu said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I have more than a story," June said, her voice shaking. But she held her ground. She fumbled in the deep pocket of her skirt. "When I fled, I ran from the alley. My satchel was at the freight depot, not the stage office. I ran inside. I was not thinking. I ran straight into a man. He was carrying a crate. He dropped it. Things scattered. This fell." She held it out on her muddy palm. It was a small, heavy brass key. "He shouted at me," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "He yelled to be careful with the blasting shed supplies. I did not think. I grabbed it, and I ran." Tohan leaned forward, his eyes sharp. He took the key and examined it. "It is a lock key, good brass, for a strong box, or a reinforced door." "There is more," June said. "While I was hiding in the alley, I watched the men who patrol the depot. There are 2. They walk the perimeter. They meet at the main gate every 30 minutes. They are lazy. They stop to smoke. Their relief comes at midnight." Silence. Luyu's face was still angry, but a flicker of doubt had entered her eyes. Tohan looked at Chayton, then at Natsa, and nodded once. This was not a story. This was military intelligence. Elder Natsa was silent for a long moment. He touched the key in Tohan's hand, then looked at the sky. "A key is a door," Natsa said, "and this one opens a door to their weapons, but a key is not proof. We cannot stop Dorn with this alone. We cannot show this to the world. They will say we stole it. They will call us thieves and murderers." "The ledger," June said, leaning forward. "The accountant, the one whose signature is on this letter." She pulled the ruined paper from her pocket. "If he signed this, he keeps Dorn's books. Those books. A man like Dorn. He is proud. He will write down his payments. He will write down who he bought. He will write down Marshall Pike." Chayton looked at her, a new respect in his eyes. She understood their world, the paper trail, the white man's weapon. Natsa nodded slowly. "The paper, that is their proof. That is what we need." He looked at his people. "A plan is now before us. The path divides." He laid it out, his voice quiet but firm. "Luyu, you will take the elders, the children, and Kale. You will take the animals, including the new one. You will go to the high caves, the winter places. You will take food for 10 days. You will leave no trail. You are the future. You must be safe." Luyu looked like she wanted to argue, to demand a place in the fight, but she held her tongue. She would obey. "Tohan," Natsa continued, "you know their tools. You have seen the dynamite on the reservation land. You will take 2 men. You will watch the blasting site. You will learn their methods. You will find a way to silence their thunder." Tohan tapped the key. "And this, Natsa said, goes back to the town. Chayton, you will go. You know the white man's ways. You know the shadows of that town." "I will go," Chayton said. "You will not go alone," Natsa said. He looked at June. "She will go with you. She is the only one who knows the accountant's face. She is the only one who will recognize the ledger. She is your key. You will get this proof." Chayton's jaw tightened. He started to protest, to say she was a weakness, a danger. But he looked at Natsa, and he looked at June. and he saw the iron logic. He was trapped. He nodded once, curtly. As the camp broke apart, a flurry of quiet, purposeful activity. Chayton found June watching the foal. Lu Yu was trying to resettle it on the travois, her movements rough with impatience. The splint, caked in mud, was slipping. "Wait," June said, stepping forward. Lu Yu glared at her. "That will not hold. The binding is wrong." June knelt. She ignored Lu Yu. She spoke to Chayton, who had come to stand beside her. "You have to tie it like this." She took a fresh strip of her cloak. "You must anchor it above the joint, here, and the knots must be flat, so they do not rub the skin. See, you pull it tight, but you must be able to feel the pulse below. You must treat it like mending a boot, strong, but with feeling." He knelt beside her, his large, dark hand next to her pale, muddy one. He watched her fingers, the way they looped and pulled, the efficient, gentle way they worked. He learned. "Now," he said, his voice low, "I will teach you." He led her to the edge of the camp. "You cannot walk into town like a ghost. You must see. You must speak as we do, without sound." He showed her 3 simple hand signals: a closed fist, held low, stop or danger; an open palm, swept forward, come; a hand slicing across the throat, silence. "And the sky," he said, pointing to the high rim. "The clouds do not lie. See how that wisp of cloud hangs? It is not a cloud, it is dust. Men on horses moving west. That darkness on the peak, that is the shadow of a man, watching. You look at the ground for tracks. I look at the sky." They were preparing to leave as a new line of dark clouds. The tail of the storm began to build. "We must wait," Chayton said, his voice tight with frustration. "Another hour, maybe 2. He led her to a small, temporary wickiup, a grass hut used by shepherds. It was dry, but small, smelling of sweet grass and smoke. They sat in the dim light, the sound of the rising wind outside. The tension was thick. He offered her a small skin of water, and she drank. "Why?" he asked, his voice startling her in the quiet. "Why did you truly run from him from Rusk?" She looked at her hands. He watched me. He made it so I could not breathe. He acted as if he owned me, my time, my work, as if I was a horse he was waiting to break. I will not be broken." He nodded. He understood that. "I failed to see a trap once," he said, his voice so low she had to strain to hear him. "With my brother, Cale, the one with the bad leg. The bullet was from a surveyor. I trusted their words. I waited 1 second too long. His leg. It is my fault. Now, I see traps everywhere." A shiver ran through the foal, which was sheltered under a small overhang nearby. It let out a low, pained sound. June rose and went to it, pulling the blanket higher on its back. Chayton was there a moment later, helping her, his hands smoothing the other side of the rough wool. In the darkness of the shelter, as they both reached to tuck the blanket, their hands met. His fingers brushed her wrist. It was not a grab. It was not a touch of intent. It was an accident of 2 people moving in a small space. But it was electric. Heat, sharp and sudden, leaped from his skin to hers. June gasped, pulling her hand back as if she had been burned. Chayton recoiled, his face hidden in the shadows, his breath catching in his throat. The space between them, which had been small, was suddenly a vast, thrumming canyon. The rain stopped, as if a tap had been turned off. "It is time," Chayton said, his voice once again hard, the moment broken. As they walked to the path leading out of the valley, Elder Natsa stopped Chayton. He put a hand on his arm and spoke in quiet Apache. June could not understand the words, but she saw the worry in the old man's eyes. Then Natsa looked at Chayton, his gaze deep and sad. "Be careful, my son," he said in English. "When the heart walks before the feet, the path will change direction." They were on the ridge, the high, dangerous path leading back toward dry water. When the scout appeared, he was running, his moccasins silent on the rock, his chest heaving. He spoke to Chayton, low and fast, in their own tongue. June did not need a translation. She saw Chayton's body go rigid. She saw the blood drain from his face, leaving his skin a pale, taut mask of pure rage. "What?" she demanded. "What is it?" Chayton turned to her. His eyes were black, empty pits of fury and guilt. "Dorn is not waiting," he whispered. "Rusk is riding, 12 men. They are sweeping the low canyons. They have orders." He stopped, his voice choking. "They have orders to take any children they find, for safety, to bring them to a new school in town. He is taking hostages." The same tactic, the one that had crippled his brother, the one that had broken his spirit. He was frozen, the past rising up to drown him. June saw his paralysis, the terrible weight of his guilt. She did not think. She stepped into his space, into the wall of his anger and his grief, and put her hand on his arm. His muscles were like knotted steel. "Chayton?" Her voice was not a whisper. It was as hard as his. "You will not let it happen again. We go now. We get the proof. We stop him." He looked down at her hand on his arm, a small, pale anchor in his storm. He looked at her face. Her fear was gone. In its place was an iron certainty that matched his own. Slowly, deliberately, he covered her hand with his. It was not a touch of comfort. It was a seal, a vow. We go," he said. Dry Water was a different town on market day. The rain had stopped, leaving the air washed and the mud thick. But the street was alive. Wagons, loaded with early crops and hides, clogged the thoroughfare. Miners, ranchers, and women in their best calico dresses crowded the boardwalks. The air, usually just dust and whiskey, was rich with the smell of fresh bread, livestock, and frying meat. They slipped into the chaos not as a pair, but as two separate streams joining the river. Chayton had traded his Apache leggings for rough canvas trousers and a flannel shirt. He carried 3 skinned rabbits tied at the feet, his hat pulled low, his face just another weathered mask in the crowd. He was a trapper come to town for supplies. Nothing more. June had tied her hair up under a worn bonnet and had found a stained, oversized apron in her satchel. She was a woman looking for kitchen work, invisible, unremarkable. They had walked the route from the high rocks, Chayton teaching her the landmarks, the weaknesses. Dorn Consolidated's office was not on the main street. It was a new 2-story clapboard building behind the land office, facing the dusty lot where the railroad planned its depot. It was arrogant, a block of civilized wood dropped into the wilderness. June's stomach was a tight, cold knot. Chayton moved ahead, vanishing into the press of people near the wagon yard. June was on her own. She walked past the building, her heart hammering. She saw the accountant, the same man from the railroad camp. Through the front window, he was hunched over his desk. She continued, circling the block, her boots heavy with mud. She found the alley. It was quiet here, away from the market. She found the back door to the office, the one Chayton had described. She looked around. No one. She pulled the heavy brass key from her pocket. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely fit it into the lock. It turned. She slipped inside, into a narrow hallway that smelled of floor oil and stale cigar smoke. She heard the scratching of the accountant's pen from the front room. The door to the back office, his storage, was right in front of her. It was unlocked. She was inside. It was dark, the one window covered, but she saw it, the desk, the shelves, and the ledgers, dozens of them, bound in black leather. She did not know which one. She pulled one down. Dorn Properties. Wrong. Another. Shipping manifests. Wrong. Her breath was loud in her ears. A shadow fell across the floor. Chayton. He had come over the roof and in through the window, silent as smoke. He had not trusted the key alone. He pointed. Not the large books, the small one. On the desk. The daily cash book. June snatched it. She opened it, her fingers flying. The same neat, precise handwriting from her false letter. She scanned the dates. She did not need to read it all. Her eyes caught the name. Pike. M. A payment, $300, marked Civic Improvement Fund. Another. Pike. M. $50, marked Gifts. "We have it," she whispered. Chayton was not looking at the book. He was at the wall, where a large canvas sheet was tacked up. He pulled it back. It was a map, a detailed drawing of Cedar Canyon, but it was covered in red lines, numbers, and X marks. It was the blasting plan. "He means to break the spine of the mountain," Chayton whispered, his voice vibrating with a cold fury. He tore the map from the wall and folded it. "Let's go," June urged. They moved back to the hallway, back to the door. Chayton looked first. The alley was clear. They stepped out into the pale sunlight, June hiding the ledger under her apron, Chayton stuffing the map inside his shirt. They were halfway down the alley when a voice cut through the air. "Hold, right there." Rusk. He stood at the end of the alley, blocking their path to the street. He was not smiling. He held a revolver, aimed steady at Chayton. Two of his men, the same ones from the chase at the creek, moved to stand beside him. "I knew it," Rusk drawled. "I knew I smelled a rat." He looked at Chayton. "And I knew I smelled you. Apache." "We are just walking," Chayton said, his voice calm, his body coiled. "Sure you are. Now, give me what you took. The girl. I saw her go in." He had not seen her face. He had seen her form, her dress, in the shadows. "I am just looking for work," June said, her voice high and thin. Rusk's eyes narrowed. He took a step closer, his gaze dropping from her face to her hands. She was clutching the apron, her knuckles white, his eyes fixed on her right wrist, on the pale crescent-shaped scar just below her palm, a mark from a childhood kitchen burn. He looked up, and his face broke into a terrible smile of recognition. "You!" He lunged. Chayton moved. He did not go for his knife. He shoved June hard, back toward the office door, putting his body between her and Rusk. At the same time, he grabbed a string of dried red chili peppers hanging from an awning post and threw them, with all his force, onto the open coals of a small vendor's brazier set up in the alley. The effect was instant. A cloud of acrid, blinding smoke erupted. It was not like wood smoke. It was a chemical weapon. Rusk roared, his hand flying to his eyes. His men choked, staggering back, coughing, their eyes streaming. "Run!" Chayton grabbed June's hand and pulled her. They did not run toward the street. They ran deeper into the maze, leaping over a stack of crates. Rusk fired his gun, but the shot was blind, the bullet smashing into a rain barrel. They ran through one alley, crossed a yard, and scrambled over a low wooden fence, only to find themselves in a dead end. Rusk, his eyes red and weeping but his rage overcoming the pain, appeared at the end of the narrow passage. He had cut them off. "Nowhere left, you animals," he spat. Chayton shoved June behind him, into the shadow of a doorway. His knife was in his hand. Rusk's knife was in his. This was not a gunfight. This was butchery. "You are too late," Rusk taunted, circling, the knives glinting. "You think you can stop us? You think that old man in the mountain matters?" "You will not break the canyon," Chayton said, his voice low. Rusk laughed. "We will, and we are not waiting 10 days. Dorn moved the date, the press, the newspaper men. They arrive tomorrow. He wants to give them a real show. We blast the first charge tomorrow. At noon, a welcome party." He lunged. Chayton met him. Steel rang against steel, a hard, brutal sound. It was not a duel, it was a brawl. Rusk was stronger, but Chayton was faster. A phantom. Chayton ducked under a wide slash, his own blade licking out, cutting a red line on Rusk's forearm. Rusk roared and charged, bull-headed. Chayton did not retreat. He stepped into the charge, kicked Rusk hard in the knee, and at the same time brought the butt of his knife down on the man's wounded arm. Rusk howled in pain and staggered, his knife arm dropping. Chayton did not press the attack. He grabbed June. Now! He threw his shoulder against a weak section of fence, splintering the wood. They fell through it, into the stable yard of the boarded-up Silver Comet. They scrambled to their feet and ran into the dark, abandoned stable. It was quiet. It smelled of old hay, decay, and rats. They pressed themselves into an empty stall, their chests heaving, the sounds of Rusk's shouts fading as he searched the wrong alley. A sudden, violent bang made June scream. A horse, a high-headed, wild-eyed bay, kicked the wall of the stall next to them. It had been left behind, forgotten, and it was mean with fear and loneliness. Its ears were pinned flat, its teeth bared as it lunged at the bars. June, her body flooded with terror, her legs shaking so badly she could barely stand, reacted on pure instinct. She ignored Chayton. She ignored the danger outside. She stepped toward the enraged animal. "Easy," she whispered, her voice trembling but finding that low, soothing register. "Easy now? I know you are scared. We are scared, too." The horse snorted, a cloud of hot breath, and kicked the wall again, its eyes rolling. "Shh," she murmured. She did not offer a hand. She just stood, her own fear radiating from her, but her voice offering a different path. "We are not here to hurt you. We are just hiding, just resting. It is all right. It is all right." Chayton watched, his knife still in his hand, his body rigid. He watched as the horse's ears, which had been flat with rage, flickered. They swiveled toward her. Testing the sound, the wild eyes softened. Just a fraction. The horse stopped lunging. It blew out a long, shuddering breath and simply watched her, its fear still present, but its aggression gone. She had tamed it with her voice. They sank down into the musty hay of the empty stall, hidden in the shadows. The rain, which had held off, began to fall again. A soft, steady drumming on the stable roof. They were soaked, Chayton from sweat, June from the dirty alley water she had fallen in. They were hidden, safe for the moment, but trapped. They sat side by side, not touching, but so close in the darkness she could feel the heat coming from his body. She could hear his breathing, deep and controlled. He could hear hers, still ragged with panic. "I am a burden," she whispered into the darkness, the words torn from her. "I am sorry. Luyu was right. I am just a complication. I put you, and all of them, in danger." He was silent for a long time. The only sounds were the rain and the soft stamp of the calmed horse. "No," he said, his voice a low rumble. He did not look at her. He stared at the dark wall in front of him. "You were not a complication. You were the one who saw. You heard the words. You found the key. You found the ledger." He paused, searching for the right words, the English words. "Natsa, our elder, he would say, 'Freedom does not ask for blood.'" He turned his head, his eyes invisible in the gloom, but she felt his gaze. "It asks for courage. You have courage, June Whitaker, more than many warriors I have known." Her breath hitched. His words settled over her, warmer than any blanket. They sat in that charged, intimate silence, two fugitives hidden in the heart of the enemy's town. The sound of the stable door creaking open broke the spell. They tensed, Chayton's knife flashing up. It was just a stable hand, come to check on the bay. He threw some hay into the stall and left, never seeing them. But the moment was gone. The reality of Rusk's words crashed down. "Tomorrow," Chayton said, his voice flat and hard again. He said tomorrow, at noon. He was not lying, June said. I saw his face. The plan has changed. Chaitin rose to his feet. Luyu is not deep enough in the mountains. Tohan is watching for a blast in 9 days. Not one. I must go. I must go now. What about me? She asked, her voice small. I cannot go with you. I will slow you down. Rusk is hunting for me. He saw my face. He knows my name. No, Chaitin said. You are right. You stay here. You are safer in the town now, in the crowd, than on the mountain. He reached into his shirt and pulled out the folded blasting map. But your part is not done. What do I do? Rusk spoke of the press, the newspaper men. They are your shield. They are the white man's weapon, the one that uses truth. He pushed the map into her hands. Find them. They will be at the hotel, or the saloon, the big one, the grand. Find the one with the Eastern suit and the notebook. Show him this. Tell him what you told me. Tell him about the false letter. Tell him about the children. And tell him, Chaitin said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, to ask Marshal Pike about his $300 civic improvement fund. He put his hand on her shoulder. It was not an accident this time. His grip was firm, a transfer of strength. Do not be seen. Wait until dark, but do not fail. He moved to the back window of the stable, a dark rectangle that opened onto the creek. Chaitin, she called, her voice desperate. He paused, a shadow against the light. Be safe, she whispered. He did not reply. He dropped from the window and was gone, absorbed by the land. June was left alone, in the dark stable, with the restless horse and the damning proof in her hands. The morning of the 10th day broke with a cold, false brightness. Silas Dorn had not waited. He saw the arrival of the newspaper man from Santa Fe as an opportunity, not a deadline. He had declared this day a celebration. Today, gentlemen, Dorn announced, his voice carrying over the unnatural quiet of the canyon mouth. We do not merely build a railroad. We bring the very concept of civilization to this hostile land. Marshal Pike had done his job, assembling a crowd from dry water. They stood on a hastily built platform, shivering in the morning air, promised free whiskey and a show. The journalist, a thin man in an Eastern suit, stood near Dorn, his notebook in hand, his expression carefully neutral. And Dorn, gesturing expansively, pointed to the sheer cliff face of Cedar Canyon. We will tame this wilderness, gentlemen. We will blast a path for progress. And it begins today, a small demonstration, to welcome our friends from the press. Rusk stood on a lower ledge, near the cluster of wooden crates and the complex web of fuse lines. He was not looking at Dorn. He was scanning the ridges, his eyes narrowed, his hand resting on his revolver. He had lost them in town, and he was coiled tight with humiliation and rage. He gave a signal. A man brought them out. 3 Apache children. The oldest was perhaps 7. They were pushed onto the ledge, their hands bound, a rope connecting them to an iron stake hammered into the rock, just feet from the main dynamite charge. A human shield. A precaution, Dorn explained smoothly to the journalist, who had stiffened. The local savages have been restless. Marshal Pike has insisted we protect their young ones from the blast zone by keeping them close. The lie was so bald, so grotesque, it hung in the air. The journalist's pen stopped moving. High above them, on the opposite rim, Chaitin lay flat against the rock, his breath frozen in his chest. He had run all night, a grueling, lung-searing ascent, his body fueled by pure, cold dread. He had found Tohan and Luyu near the winter camp, intercepting them just as they were preparing to move the elders. His words had been few. He is doing it, now. He has the children. Now, he saw them. Luyu let out a sound, a choked, terrible gasp. She knew the children. They were her second cousins. Chaitin's vision went red. This was Kale again. This was his failure, magnified by 3. He felt Tohan's heavy hand on his shoulder. Not yet, the blacksmith rumbled. The fuse is not lit. He is a coward. He is talking. We wait. Chaitin forced himself to breathe, to think. Luyu, he whispered, his voice shaking. You move east, to the rock slide. Get below him. When I move, you cut them free. Do not wait. Just cut. Luyu nodded, her face a mask of stone, her eyes burning. She slid away, a shadow moving over shadows. Tohan, Chaitin said. The main fuse. It runs from the ledge to that signal post, then to the plunger. He will light it, not use the electric charge. He wants the smoke, the fire. For his show, you must get to that line. I see it. Tohan said, It is a long way. We will make time. Chaitin said, Down below. June was invisible. She was exactly where she had been in her nightmares working for the railroad. After Chaitin had left, she had delivered the map and the ledger information to the journalist in a late night, frantic meeting at the hotel. He had believed her, but he was one man. With a pen, he could not stop a bullet, and he could not stop a fuse. June knew she had to. She had used her disguise. She had walked bold as brass to the blasting site, her apron on, her hair tucked under a scarf. She told the guards Marshal Pike had sent her to help the catering crew feed Dorn's guests. It was a market day lie. Simple and effective. They waved her through. She was in the mess tent, 50 yards from the blasting platform. She was pouring coffee, her hands shaking, her eyes scanning the depot. She saw the blasting shed. It was guarded, but the crates themselves, the ones for the demonstration, were already on the ledge. A small, separate pile of fuses and detonator caps lay on a workbench near the tent. She saw her chance. A man yelled for more coffee, his voice rough. June grabbed the boiling pot. She stumbled. She screamed as the scalding coffee hit the ground, just missing the guard's boots. He swore at her, jumping back. 2 other men laughed. For 30 seconds, every eye was on her, the clumsy kitchen girl. And in those 30 seconds, her other hand, the one not holding the pot, moved. It darted to the workbench. It swept a small box of copper detonator caps into her apron pocket. In its place, she dropped a handful of empty brass casings she had found discarded by the gunsmith's shop. A box of duds. It was not enough. She did not know if they would use those caps. She needed to mark the main charges, the ones she knew were active. Her pocket was still full of the chili powder she had used as a weapon against Rusk. Her hand closed around it. I am sorry, she whispered, bowing her head in apology. Let me get a cloth. Let me clean my mess. She moved, shuffling, apologetic. She walked past the main stack of dynamite crates. As she passed, her hand, coated in the fine red powder, brushed lightly, lovingly, against the side of each one. A faint, almost invisible, handprint of red dust. She went back to the tent, her heart trying to escape her chest. Dorn was finishing his speech. And now, at precisely noon. Sir, a worker, the one prepping the charge, interrupted him. He looked confused. He held up his hand, which was stained red. This powder, on the crates, I think... Dorn stopped. He walked to the crate. He saw the faint, unmistakable outline of a hand. He touched it. He smelled his fingers. Chili. His civilized mask evaporated. He knew that smell. He had heard Rusk's report from the alley. Sabotage! He hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. She is here. They are here. He turned to Rusk, his face pale with rage. Forget the press. Forget the show. Light it. Light it now. Panic. The timeline collapsed. Noon was gone. The new time was now. 5 minutes. A technician grabbed a slow match fuse. He ran to the main line. From the ridge, Chaitin saw the sudden, frantic activity. Now! He roared. Tohan, go! Tohan broke cover, running, leaping down the rocks toward the fuse line. Rusk saw him, rifleman on the ridge. But before the men could fire, the sky, which had been bright, turned a sick, bruised purple. The wind rose with a sudden, mournful howl. The false morning was a lie. The storm was back. A jagged spear of white-blue lightning struck the metal signal post that anchored the fuse line. The post exploded in a shower of sparks. The wire, ripped from its mooring, fell to the wet ground. The technician, undeterred, jammed his slow match against the end of the fallen fuse. It was wet. It did not catch. It sputtered, a weak, pathetic fizz, the flame struggling to bite. The blast was delayed, not stopped, delayed. In the chaos of the sudden storm and the failed fuse, June saw her own chance. She began to edge away from the mess tent, moving toward the rocks, toward the path Luyu had taken. "You—" Rusk's roar cut through the wind. He had been looking for her, waiting for her. He lunged, his hand catching her arm in a grip of iron. "You are not going anywhere, you little witch!" he snarled. He dragged her from the cover of the tent, out onto the open ledge, pulling her toward the sputtering fuse. The children, bound to the rock, watched her, their eyes wide with terror. He put his revolver to her temple. The metal was cold, wet with rain. "Chayton!" Rusk screamed, his voice tearing against the wind. "I know you are watching, you coward! Show yourself, or she joins your ancestors!" A single shot rang out. A chip of rock exploded near Rusk's feet. "Let her go, Rusk." Chayton stood on the high ridge, fully exposed, his rifle at his shoulder. He was too far for a killing shot, but close enough to be a target. "Drop it!" Rusk yelled, hauling June back, using her body as a shield. "Drop the rifle, or I will paint the rocks with her." Chayton looked at June. Her face was white with terror, but she met his gaze. He saw the strength he had named. He slowly, agonizingly, lowered his rifle to the ground. Rusk laughed, a triumphant, ugly sound. "I knew it. I knew you were weak. A woman and some brats. That is all it takes." He was focused on Chayton. He did not see Luyu, who had reached the ledge below him. She did not hesitate. She darted from her cover, her knife flashing. She did not attack Rusk. She sliced the ropes holding the children, her voice a sharp command in Apache. "Run to the rocks!" Rusk turned, stunned by the sudden movement. He did not see Tohan, who had used the distraction to crawl to the edge of the platform. Tohan rose, his arm swinging. He threw a heavy bag of dry sand he had carried for tamping fuses. The bag burst, a cloud of blinding grit hitting Rusk square in the face. Rusk screamed, his eyes full of sand. He stumbled, his gun firing wildly into the air, his grip on June loosening for one critical second. June did not run. She grabbed his wrist, the one holding the revolver. She did not try to pull it away. With all her strength, with the memory of the alley, the memory of the camp, she shoved his arm down, pointing the barrel not at Chayton, not at herself, but at the sputtering, smoking fuse line on the ground. She put her hand over his, forcing his finger back on the trigger. The gun fired. The bullet struck the primary copper detonator cap that the fuse was struggling to ignite. The cap exploded. It was not the main blast. It was a sharp, violent crack, a sound like a small cannon. The blast was contained, but it was powerful enough. It vaporized the cap, shattered the blasting machine, and severed the entire ignition line. The sputtering fuse went dead. The silence that followed was heavier than the thunder. The immediate threat was gone. The silence that followed the explosion of the cap was a hollow, ringing vacuum. It lasted a single heartbeat. It was broken by Silas Dorn. His face, which had been pale with rage, was now a mask of pure, reptilian fury. "Fools!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. Kill them all!" The railroad guards, hired for their brutality, not their loyalty, opened fire. The air, already thick with rain and ozone, was suddenly filled with the snap and whine of bullets. The crowd of townspeople on the viewing platform screamed, a single, terrified sound, and began to stampede, scrambling back toward the path to dry water, creating a bottleneck of panic. Chayton, his rifle back in his hands, returned fire from the ridge, the sound sharp and clear. He was not aiming to kill, he was aiming to pin them, to provide cover. Tohan, roaring like a bear, charged the two guards closest to the children, using his massive bulk as a human battering ram, knocking them both from the ledge. The scene dissolved into a nightmare of mud, smoke, and chaos. The storm, which had momentarily held its breath, unleashed its full power. The rain came down in solid, horizontal sheets, and the lightning, which had already saved them once, found a new target. It struck the tallest, most arrogant structure in the canyon, the central support piling of the half-finished wooden bridge, the raw pine, slick with rain but full of sap, exploded in a shower of splinters. Fire, blue and electric at first, licked the scaffolding. The rain tried to drown it, but the wood was too rich. The flames caught, a greedy, roaring orange against the black sky. Rusk, rubbing the last of the sand from his raw eyes, saw his moment. His enemy was not Chayton, who was still too far away. His enemy was June. She was scrambling toward the rocks where Luyu was hiding the children. He ignored the bullets, the fire, the screaming. He charged her. Chayton saw it. He left the cover of the ridge. He did not climb. He slid, half running, half falling, down the slick, muddy rock face, his descent reckless, desperate. He moved with an impossible, ground-eating speed. He hit the ledge just as Rusk grabbed June by the hair, yanking her head back. Chayton did not stop. His shoulder struck Rusk's chest with the force of a stampeding bull. The two men went down, rolling in the thick red mire, their breath driven from them. They scrambled to their feet, their knives lost in the mud. They were equals now. Just two men, soaked to the bone, their fists clenched. Rusk snarled. A low, animal sound. He did not charge again. He ran. He retreated, leaping onto the main support beam of the burning bridge, his boots finding purchase on the smoking wood. This was his ground. He was a builder, a destroyer. He would fight Chayton there, high above the world. Chayton did not hesitate. He followed him. They were suddenly alone, high above the chaos, silhouettes against the growing fire. The wind tore at them, trying to peel them from the beam. Rain hissed as it struck the burning wood. They met in the center of the span. Rusk, heavier and stronger, swung a looping, brawling punch. Chayton ducked. The wind from the blow was so strong it ruffled his wet hair. He stepped inside the punch, not with a fist, but with an open palm strike to Rusk's chest, a hard, sharp shove designed to break balance. Rusk staggered back, his heavy boot, slick with mud, slid on the wet, charred wood. He went over. His arms windmilled, his face a mask of sudden, shocked terror. His hand, grasping wildly, caught the edge of the beam. He dangled, his full, heavy weight held by one desperate grip. The fire licked at his back. The canyon, 1,000 feet of empty air, yawned below him. Chayton stood over him. He looked down at the man who had hunted June, who had threatened the children, who had crippled Cale in spirit, if not in body. He looked at the raw terror in Rusk's eyes, and he saw his brother, falling. He saw the failure he had lived with for a year. He knelt, the heat of the fire scorching his face. He reached down and grabbed Rusk's thick wrist. "I will not let you fall!" Chayton grunted, the words torn from him, his muscles straining against the man's weight. He pulled. He hauled Rusk up from the abyss. Rusk was on his knees, coughing, safe, clinging to the beam. He looked at Chayton. His terror was gone. It was replaced by the same familiar, venomous hatred that defined him. "Fool," Rusk spat. He lunged, not to his feet, but forward, driving his head like a goat, striking Chayton square in the stomach. The blow knocked the air from Chayton. He was thrown backward, his balance shattered. He was falling, the same way Rusk had, his hands grasping at empty, smoky air. June, watching from the ledge, screamed. She saw Rusk rising, a triumphant, demonic figure in the flames. She saw Chaitin, arms spread, about to die. She did not think. Her hands fumbled at her belt, at the heavy leather loop that held her livelihood. She ripped her farrier's hammer from its holster. It was her tool of mending, her promise of a new life. She threw it. She did not aim. It was an instinctive, desperate act of protection. The heavy steel hammer spun end over end. True and heavy, it struck Rusk square in the back of the head. The sound was not loud. It was a dull, wet, final thud. Rusk stiffened. His triumphant look vanished, replaced by a profound, empty surprise. He did not fall backward. He pitched forward, a dead weight, off the bridge and into the smoke and the rain. He vanished into the depths of Cedar Canyon. Chaitin, who had caught his balance at the last possible second, clung to the beam, his chest heaving. He stared at the place where his enemy had been, then looked down at the ledge, at June. Silas Dorn did not watch the fight. He was a man of ledgers and profits, not primitive brawls. He saw his bridge burning. He saw his foreman fall. He saw his guards overwhelmed by Tohon and a new wave of Apache scouts arriving from the ridges. His investment was in flames. His demonstration was a catastrophic failure. He turned, calmly, deliberately. He walked away from the chaos toward the small maintenance engine that sat on a temporary track. It was a single, small car, used for hauling supplies. He climbed into the cabin. He would leave Drywater, leave this disaster. He would cut his losses and let the law clean up the savagery. He released the brake. The engine hissed. June saw him. She saw the architect of all this, the man who had trapped her, who had ordered the children taken, simply leaving. She ran. She did not run toward the engine. She ran toward the temporary corral where the railroad crew kept their horses. She grabbed the gate, her hands fumbling with a rope latch. She tore it open. "Yah!" she screamed, her voice raw, waving her arms. "Go run!" The horses, already panicked by the gunfire, the thunder, and the smell of fire, needed no second invitation. They exploded from the pen, a wave of brown and black, a thunder of animal terror. They ran directly onto the tracks, and leading them, running not with a limp, but with a strong, if awkward, gait, was the foal. The splint, the one she had set in the cave, was holding. It was running with its mother. It was running free. The herd, a solid wall of horseflesh, blocked the track. Dorn's engine screeched, its iron wheels locking, sparks flying, but it could not plow through them. He was trapped. Marshal Pike had seen enough. His reputation was ruined. His benefactor, Dorn, was trapped. His gifts were about to be exposed. He saw June, standing by the empty corral, the woman who had started it all. He raised his rifle, taking careful aim at her back. He would end this complication himself. "Marshal." The voice was not a shout. It was a sharp, educated command. The journalist from Santa Fe stood on the path from town. He was not alone. Behind him were the people of Drywater, the shopkeepers, the miners, the women. They had heard the gunfire, seen the fire, and had followed the reporter, who was holding aloft a black, leather-bound book. "Marshal Pike," the journalist called out, his voice carrying in the sudden lull. "I believe the good people of this town would be very interested to know about your $300 Civic Improvement Fund." Pike froze. He looked from the journalist's steady, accusing gaze to the sea of pale, angry, accusing faces, his town. They were all staring at him. He slowly, very slowly, lowered his rifle. On the ledge, the fight was over. Tohon had the remaining guards tied. Chaitin dropped from the smoking bridge. His legs shaking, he and Tohon immediately moved to the dynamite. The main fuse was destroyed, but the crates themselves were still live. They worked quickly. their hands sure, pulling the copper detonator caps from the sticks, disarming the threat. "Where is the other box?" Tohan asked, his brow furrowed. "The one from the shed." "It does not matter." Chayton began. "They are—" He was interrupted by a muffled, deep thump. A single, stray charge, perhaps one set for a different demonstration, went off. It was a late, slow fuse, ignited by the bridge fire. The explosion was not on the main ledge. It was under Dorn's construction shed. The building erupted in a plume of wood, paper, and tools, erasing the last sign of Dorn's project. It harmed no one. The journalist walked onto the chaotic platform, holding the ledger high. "This, ladies and gentlemen," he said, "is Mr. Dorn's private ledger. It details every payment to Marshal Pike. It also details his plan to seize this land by force, land which, according to the territorial office in Prescott, still legally belongs to the Apache." He held up the blasting map. The proof was absolute. June stood, watching. She saw the ledger. She saw Pike, his head bowed, disarmed by his own citizens. She saw Dorn, a prisoner in his own engine. She saw Luyu, wrapping the children in dry blankets, their faces safe. She saw Chayton, alive. The iron rod of courage that had held her up for 2 days, the strength that had come from pure terror and desperation, dissolved. Her knees buckled. The world went gray at the edges. She did not hit the ground. Chayton was there. He had crossed the yard in 3 strides, catching her as she fell. He held her, his arm wrapped tightly around her waist, her head resting against his chest. She was shaking, a terrible, racking series of shudders that shook her entire body. He just held her, his face buried in her wet hair, his own body trembling with the adrenaline of the fight. They stood like that for a long moment in the rain, a silent promise made and kept. The spell was broken by the crowd. They were no longer a passive audience. They were a mob. They saw Pike's betrayal. They saw Dorn's greed. They advanced on the Marshal and on Dorn, their voices a single, angry roar. Thief, liar, murderer. They surrounded the town hall, trapping Pike inside. They cut Dorn off from any escape. The community, for so long divided by fear and greed, had finally, definitively, chosen a side. The adrenaline of the fight drained away, leaving a cold, muddy reality. The rain softened, but the sky remained a heavy gray. The crowd from Dry Water, their brief, unified anger fading into confusion, stood on the muddy platform, looking at the dead fire, the ruined work site, and the small group of Apache warriors who had appeared on the ridge. The journalist, Abernathy, was the only one who seemed to know what to do. He held the ledger like a shield, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "This is not over," he declared, his gaze falling on Marshal Pike, who was trying to slip away into the crowd. "Marshal, you are bound by oath to detain Mr. Dorn, pending an investigation by the territorial marshals." Pike, his face the color of wet ash, looked at the angry eyes of his town. He had no allies left. He did as he was told, placing Silas Dorn under a reluctant, humiliated arrest. It took 2 days for the full weight of the law to arrive. Abernathy's telegraph from the day before had painted a stark picture, and the territorial marshals who rode in from Prescott were not interested in local politics. They were humorless men who answered to the governor. They read the ledger. They read Abernathy's account. They listened to Tohan, who described the armed guards and the hostages. They listened to June, who quietly explained the false letter and the threats. Silas Dorn was taken east in irons. His railroad, the one he had tried to build on arrogance and violence, was finished. The federal investigation into his contracts, spurred by the scandal, would ruin him. Marshal Pike was stripped of his badge and told to be out of the territory by sundown. The town of Dry Water was left raw, exposed, and suddenly, strangely, quiet. They found Rusk's body at the bottom of a ravine, caught in the branches of a shattered pine. The fall had left little of his face recognizable. Chaitin, Tohan, and 2 other men carried him back to the town cemetery. There was no one to claim him, no family to mourn him. The railroad crew that had not fled simply looked at the ground, anxious for their own back pay. A simple pine box was built. A hole was dug in the wet earth. June stood by the cemetery gate, her hands clenched. She felt she should be here, to see the end of it, but she felt no triumph, only a deep, aching weariness. Chaitin stood by the open grave as the last shovelful of dirt was thrown on. The railroad men drifted away, heading for the saloon. June and Chaitin were left alone, the only mourners for a man no one would miss. He did not look at her. He just stared at the mound of raw, red earth. He had fought this man. He had defeated him. He had also, for one impossible second, tried to save him. He had held his life in his hands. Slowly, his hand went to the small, worn leather pouch at his belt. His mother's blessing, the blue cornmeal. He had clutched it in the cave, a symbol of his duty, a shield against his past failure. His fingers fumbled with the drawstring. He opened the pouch. He turned it upside down, and a stream of fine, pale blue powder fell onto the grave. He shook it until it was empty. He was not blessing Rusk. He was not honoring his enemy. He was letting it go. He was releasing the guilt that had bound him since Cale's fall. He was forgiving himself. The act was quiet, profound, and final. He dropped the empty pouch onto the grave, a last, small offering. He had paid the price for his own violence. He turned, his face unreadable but his shoulders lighter, and walked out of the cemetery. In the high meadow, life began to heal. The scar of the blasting site, the burned bridge, was a reminder. But the grass, fed by the storm, was already growing back. June found her place in the Apache camp. Not as a captive, not as a guest, but as something new she did not have a name for. She worked, she cooked, this time with proper supplies, teaching the women how to fry bread the way the railroad crews liked it, and learning from them the magic of corn and squash. But her real work was with the horses. The foal, the one she had saved in the storm, had become her shadow. It was now 3 weeks since the fight. The leg was strong. The time had come. She knelt in the bright sunlight, the tall grass warm against her arms. Chaitin watched her, as he often did, from a distance. He leaned against a tall ponderosa, his arms crossed, his presence a quiet, steady weight. June spoke to the foal, her voice the same low murmur she had used in the cave. "All right," she whispered. "This is it. Time to see." She carefully, gently, unwound the strips of her old cloak, the fabric stiff with mud and time. She cut the last knot. The wooden splints fell away. The leg was whole. A hard, clean knot of new bone marked the break. But it was straight. It was strong. She put her hands on the leg, her thumbs beginning a slow, practiced massage. She worked the muscles that had been held rigid for so long, coaxing life and blood back into them. Her hands, which had felt the trigger of Rusk's gun, which had stolen a ledger, were now doing what they were made for. They were healing. The foal stamped its foot, testing the new freedom, then leaned its head against her shoulder, a complete and total surrender of trust. June closed her eyes, her hand stroking its neck. She had mended what was broken. The tribal council met under the shade of the sacred cottonwood tree. Elder Natsa presided, his face calm. Tohan was there, Luyu, her anger replaced by a quiet, watchful gravity. Was there? And Chaitin. They asked June to sit, not in the circle, but near it. "The railroad is gone," Natsa began. "The Mandorn is gone, Pike is gone, but the town remains. The world remains. We should close the canyon," Luyu said, her voice sharp. "We have shown our strength. Now we must show our wisdom. Let no one pass. They have poisoned our land." "And how do we get the steel for our plows?" Tohan countered. his voice a practical rumble. "How do we trade for the cartridges we need? We cannot build a wall against the whole world. It will only come crashing down." Chayton remained silent, listening. Natsa held up a hand. "We cannot live as we once did. That time is gone, but we will not live as they want us to. We will not be their victims, and we will not be their prisoners." He made his ruling. Cedar Canyon, the high path, the sacred ground, is closed. It is ours, forever. But the low road, the trade path to dry water, will be open. We will trade. We will be neighbors. But we will be neighbors with a strong fence. We will trade on our terms. His ancient eyes moved, settling on June. "This leaves one question, the white woman." June's stomach tightened. She felt like she was on trial again. "She is not of the people," one of the older men said. "She has no place here." "She has hands that heal," said she who remembers, who was seated behind Natsa. "The foal, which should be bones, now runs. That is a sign." "She has a warrior's heart," Tohan added. "She walked into the enemy's camp. She blinded the man Rusk. She broke the thunderstick. I have seen warriors with less courage." Natsa nodded slowly, as if he were weighing the earth itself. "She is a complication, but she is also a bridge. Perhaps she is the kind of bridge that mends, instead of the kind that breaks." He looked directly at June. "We have need of your skills. Our horses are strong, but the world changes. We must learn the iron shoe. We have need of a cook who can make much from little. You have earned a place, if you will take it." He offered her a job, a home. "You will have a wiki up. You will have our protection, and you will work as we all work." It was a formal invitation. It was safety. It was acceptance. June looked at their faces. She saw kindness. She saw suspicion. But they were not her faces. They were not her people. The old, cold fear of being an outsider, of never belonging, washed over her. I do not know," she whispered, looking at her hands. I am not one of you." That evening, the air cool and smelling of pine. Chayton found her by the creek. She was staring into the water. "You should accept," he said. She did not look at him. "Why, so I can be your tame white woman, so you can all watch me, and wonder if I will betray you." "No," he said, his voice quiet, "so you can have a home, so you can be safe." "I will never be safe," she said, her voice bitter. "I am just a stray. Like that foal, I do not belong anywhere." He was silent for a long time. Then he sat on the rock beside her, not close, but not far. "I went to Natsa," he said, his voice low. "After the council, I asked him for permission." "Permission for what?" "To walk a new path." He turned to look at her, his dark eyes clear in the twilight. "Natsa told me, he said that the heart sometimes walks before the feet. He said the law is to hold the people together, not to break them apart." He reached out, not to grab her. He just opened his hand. "June, you are not a stray. You are not a complication." He searched for the word. "You are necessary. To me." She looked at his hand, strong and dark. The hand that had saved her from Rusk's whip. The hand that had held hers on the mountain. The hand that had tried to save his enemy. Later that night, Chayton went to the elder's wickiup. "I have asked her," he said. Natsa nodded, as if he had been expecting this. And her answer, "She is still afraid. She does not believe she belongs." "And you?" Natsa asked. "What do you believe?" Chayton stood straight. The guilt was gone. The confusion was gone. "I believe my path has changed direction," he said, using the elder's own words. "I believe she is my path." The next day, June rode into dry water. She had one last thing to do. The town was already changing. The marshal's office was shuttered. The railroad office was a burned-out husk. But down the street, the sound of hammering and women's laughter came from the Silver Comet. She looked inside. The boards were down. 2 women, wives of local ranchers, were inside, scrubbing the bar. "We bought it," one of them announced proudly to June. Pike's wife took all his money and fled. Sold us the deed for 10 cents on the dollar. We are opening next week. Good food, good jobs, and no men allowed in the kitchen. The woman smiled. "You looking for work, honey?" June felt a smile break across her own face. The first real, unguarded smile in a year. "No," she said. "Thank you. I have a position. I just came to, send a letter." She went to the post office. She bought a single sheet of paper and an envelope. She dipped the pen in the ink, her hand no longer shaking. She wrote to her aunt in Boston, the only family she had left. She did not write about the fire, or the fear, or the blood. She wrote, "I am not coming back. I have found good work, in a good place. The air is clean, and I am working with horses. I am well." She signed her name, June Whitaker. She looked at the words. Then she added 2 more, words that felt true. A person of the wind. She sealed the envelope, closing the final door to her past. She walked out into the sunlight, her shoulders back, and did not look back. She turned her horse toward the high, red peaks of Cedar Canyon. The world, which had been gray and angry, was now a deep, resounding blue. The storms were finished. The land, washed clean of the dynamite, the mud and the blood, smelled of wet sage and pine. In the high hidden valley, Elder Natsa declared a feast. It was not a celebration of victory. It was a festival of gratitude for the end of the rain. The steady, driving heartbeat of the drums echoed from the canyon walls. Fires burned bright, and the smell of roasting corn and savory stew filled the air. June sat by the main fire, her hands busy mending a blanket. Her presence no longer a question, but a quiet fact. Luyu, whose anger had long since melted into a fierce, protective friendship, sat beside her. She tried to pull June into the circle dance. "You must learn the rhythm," Luyu insisted, her eyes bright. "Your feet are too stiff." June laughed, her movements clumsy and awkward as she tried to follow the complex, shuffling steps. She was not a dancer, but the children laughed, and she found herself laughing with them, her face flushed with the heat of the fire and the simple joy of belonging. She was learning. The 2 cultures, which had collided in violence, were now sharing a fire. Later, when the moon was a high, silver coin and the drums had softened, Chayton found her. She had moved away from the celebration, to the quiet of the horse corral. She was watching the foal, now sleek and strong, as it rested beside its mother. "You left the dance," he said, his voice quiet. "I am not good at it," she said, smiling in the darkness. "My feet do not understand the music." He stood beside her. The silence that settled between them was no longer the heavy, charged silence of the cave, or the desperate quiet of the stable. It was a comfortable, settled peace. "I have something," he said. He held out his hand. In his palm was the small, worn leather pouch. It was not the one he had left on Rusk's grave. It was a new one, or perhaps the same one, cleaned, the leather dark and supple, the drawstring replaced. It felt heavy. "My mother gave this to me," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It held the blue cornmeal. It was a way to hold on to the earth, a way to remember home." "But you left it," she said, her voice hesitant. "I left the guilt," he replied. "The past. An anchor must hold a house, not a grave." He pressed the pouch into her hand. She felt the fine, heavy powder inside. It was full. "A home needs an anchor. I want you to have this." June's throat tightened. She looked from the pouch to his face. It was not a gift. It was a declaration. "You are home." She fumbled in the pocket of her dress, her fingers closing around the hard, familiar shape that she now carried. She pulled out her farrier's hammer, the tool that had defined her, the tool that had saved his life. "This is all I have," she whispered. "It is my trade. It is my promise. It is how I mend what is broken." She held it out to him, the worn wooden handle warm from her body. He took it. His large hand closed around the grip, his fingers fitting into the grooves her own hand had worn. He held her promise. She held his. He looked at her, his dark eyes clear and steady in the moonlight. He wanted to close the small, aching distance between them, but the time was not right, not here. "Come," he said, his voice rough. He took her hand, and she did not pull away. He led her through the sleeping camp, past the glowing embers of the dance fire, to the large, quiet wickiup where Elder Natsa sat, smoking, his eyes on the stars. Chayton stopped before the old man. He did not release her hand. He held up the heavy hammer so the elder could see it. He spoke in Apache, his voice low and formal. He spoke of the path, of the storm, of the way his world had been turned inside out. He spoke of his heart walking before his feet, and how his feet had finally caught up. He asked, not for a wife, but for a partner. June stood beside him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She did not understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was the sound of a man making a binding oath. Natsa listened without moving. When Chayton finished, the elder smoked in silence, the smoke rising in a thin, straight line toward the sky. Finally, he tapped the ash from his pipe. He looked at June, and his eyes were kind. "He says his path has changed," Natsa said, his voice soft. "He says you are his path. He asks for the people's blessing to bind his life to yours." June felt her breath catch. "Our law," Natsa continued, "is to hold the people together, not to break them apart. You are not ND, June Whitaker. You do not have the blood, but your spirit is true. You have healed our wounds, and he has healed yours. The path is open." He looked at Chayton and gave a small, weary smile. "Go. The spirits are tired of old men talking." Chayton led her away from the firelight, past the last of the shelters, to a grove of ancient, twisted juniper trees that stood on the edge of the valley. The air was cold and clean. He stopped, turning to face her. He still held the hammer in one hand. She still held the pouch in hers. He did not pull her to him. He did not demand. He simply raised his free hand and touched her face. His fingers were rough, calloused, but his touch was unbelievably gentle, as if he were afraid she might break. He traced the line of her jaw, his thumb brushing her lower lip. "June," he whispered. It was a question, a plea, and an answer all in one. She leaned into his hand, her eyes closing, her fear gone. He bent his head. His lips met hers. It was not a kiss of fire or conquest. It was a kiss of arrival. It was quiet and slow, and as real as the stone beneath their feet. It tasted of wood smoke and the clear, cold air of the high country. It was a promise, more binding than any ledger, more final than any gunshot. When he pulled back, they simply stood, breathing the same air. "What do we do now?" she whispered, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "I cannot live in the hidden valley. I will always be the other, and you cannot leave your people." "So we will make a new place," he said, his voice calm. "A place in the middle. Natsa has given his blessing. The town needs us. The people need us. We will build on the trade path, the one that is open." "A trading post," she said, her mind catching his. "I will run it," he said. "I speak the language. I will trade fairly, but they will need more." A slow smile spread across her face. "They will," she agreed. "Travelers will need a place to rest. They will need a good kitchen, and they will need someone to care for their horses. A farrier." "A stable," he said, his own voice softening as he saw the future she was building. "And a kitchen, a place to teach." "Teach what?" "To teach them," Chayton said, his gaze moving to the vast, dark canyon. "How to treat the land, how to treat the horses, not with whips and dynamite, but with respect, with kindness." The future of the valley settled into a new, quieter rhythm. The railroad, facing a federal investigation and the public scandal from Abernathy's articles, abandoned the Cedar Canyon route. It was too costly, too bloody. They moved their line 30 miles south, a scar on a different part of the land. Dry water did not boom. It survived. The Silver Comet, run by the women of the town, became the hub of a new fair trade agreement with the Apache. Steel tools, flour, and sugar were traded for well-tanned hides and corn. Chayton and June built their post at the mouth of the low canyon. It was a simple, strong building of stone and pine, with a solid, clean stable and a warm kitchen that always smelled of baking bread. Chayton found his peace, not in guarding a border, but in opening a door. He saw Cale, his brother, working with Tohan, learning the blacksmith trade, his limp a reminder not of failure, but of survival. June, who had arrived as a complication, had become the bridge. She was the one who spoke to the ranchers' wives, who taught the Apache children how to set a splint, and who learned from She Who Remembers the names of the healing herbs. She was no longer running. She was anchored. One afternoon, in the bright, sharp light of the first autumn, she stood outside the post. The corrals were full, the stable was clean. Chayton was on the roof, securing a new beam. She looked out across the meadow. A band of horses grazed, their coats shining in the sun. A young horse, a deep, beautiful bay, suddenly broke from the herd. It kicked up its heels, tossing its head, and ran, a blur of pure, joyful speed. It was the foal. Its leg was perfect. It was whole. It galloped across the meadow and stopped before her, its eyes bright, its breath a warm cloud in the cool air. She reached out and laid her hand on its strong, proud neck. Chayton dropped from the roof, his landing as silent as a cat's. He came to stand beside her, not touching, but close, their shoulders almost brushing. He looked at the horse, then at her hand on its mane. "You did not break it," he said, his voice quiet. "No," June said, stroking the sleek, warm skin. "You do not heal things by breaking them." He looked at her, his dark eyes holding hers, his face soft. He knew, in that moment, that she was not just talking about the horse. Love, he had learned, was its own art. It was not capture, not conquest, not a breaking of the will. It was patience. It was healing. It was the slow, steady act of building trust and guiding, gently, toward home. They stood together, watching the horse run free across the open land. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from. Please, leave a comment below to say hello and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. And if you really want to support us, press that hype button to help this story be heard by more people.